If you're not familiar with Church Militant or Michael Voris, then I would encourage you to skip this video. If I don't think preoccupying yourself with the fascinations of scandal are gonna do you any good. And so I would encourage you to go read a book or move on and watch something more productive and more edifying for your soul. But if you are somebody who has been in the habit of watching Church Militant or paying attention to what they say, then I think that there's going to be some fruit, some valuable fruit for you to consider in this video. But for those of us that are left over, I can honestly say that I was not in the habit of watching or paying attention to Church Militant. I mean, it's very hard to ignore them entirely or avoid them, but I was not subscribed to them. I didn't watch their content pretty much ever. But if I had paid attention to them, if I'd put my trust in the things that they were saying and the commentaries that they were making and trying to inform and educate myself based on their content, I would be extremely alarmed by the recent revelations and the disgrace that Michael Voris and that organization are currently experiencing. I would be really alarmed by the fact that I put my trust in somebody who was so clear, who now that we know, now that these revelations have been revealed, revelations have been revealed, that's great, that we know that there is this double standard and this really reprehensible hypocrisy that was at play the entire time. I would be shocked and dismayed profoundly. This supposed sin and double life that he's been guilty of living is like I said, it's extremely reprehensible. But the thing I find really curious about all of this is, what about the sin that wasn't secret? What about the sin that was on full display every time they published a video, every time a Vortex video came out? What about the very obvious sin that was going on there? That to me is the much more alarming phenomenon when it comes to Church Militant. And I'm speaking about the sin of detraction and possibly calumny as well. And so let's pause here and just talk about the definition of those two things, because maybe just a lot of people don't know about it, and so therefore it's easy for it to fly under the radar or be smuggled into your content without you really noticing. Let's talk about detraction. So detraction is the unjust exposure of the sins or faults of another person, which is made all the more serious and grave when it's with the intent to malign their reputation. And it's made even more serious and more grave when that person is a person of public standing. They're renowned in their reputation because the consequences are that much more severe. Now, if you're somebody who is in the habit of constantly, habitually denouncing other people for their sins and shortcomings, like week after week, maybe even day after day, I don't know what their publishing schedule was like, but every time I saw a Vortex video, I mean, that was the premise of the video, where, what was it like, where lies and deceits are trapped and exposed. Okay, so you're gonna go and find supposed deceptions and the sins of other people, and then expose them for the public's curiosity. Maybe there were times in which that was done justly, but if you're doing it every day, week in and week out, you're going to eventually do it unjustly. Now, I know some people will think to themselves, and I'm sure maybe Church Militant used this argument themselves, where they would say that admonishing the sinner is a work of mercy. It's a spiritual work of mercy, and therefore a good thing to do. What about exposing the evils and the corruptions of the world? Well, let's apply this in scenarios that might be relevant to our own lives. Let's say you know somebody who is in the habit of telling tall tales. And I think we maybe all have known somebody, or maybe even know somebody like this ourselves, where you're at a dinner party and you're telling a story, and they'll sort of jump in and say, oh yeah, well, this one time, and then they'll go on this tangent telling you this story that's where you're scratching your head a little bit thinking like, I think that was stretched a bit. I doubt it actually happened like that. But let's say you know somebody like that, where you're fairly certain, you have a strong suspicion that they are in the habit of bearing false witness. Well, what should you do about it? What should your response be about that in that scenario? What's the Christian way to try to correct them? Because our intention here should be to secure their reform, to get them to admit and acknowledge their shortcoming or their sins, and to say, okay, I'm going to make amends and I'm going to try to correct this behavior. Our aim should be to secure the state of grace and the benefit of that person's soul. So how would we go about doing that? Well, we could, at the next dinner party that they're not at, just announce to all of our friends, go and make the case for how morally corrupt you think this person is. You're going to expose them for their lies. I think any reasonable person could look at that and say, no, that is not the mature or good way to approach something like that. What you should do is go and gently correct that person. Go have a sit down with them. Remind them that you are their friend, you are their brother or their sister in Christ, and that you want what's right for them. And that, there's been a couple times where you think that they might have gone over the line with something, and that maybe you're wrong, maybe you're right, and you have genuine concern for them, and you want to help them try to correct that behavior. That would be the best way to approach a scenario like that. But the former, if you just did that, if you just started gossiping about them and denouncing them, I mean, the only way to interpret something like that is it's for your own benefit or for your own ego or just the pleasure of the moral superiority that might come from something like that. And anybody who's in the habit of doing something like that, you have to wonder, what are they compensating for? If they're so desperate to think of themselves as being so morally upstanding, that's a red flag. And it's obviously a red flag that should have gone off in the case of Michael Voris, because he obviously was living a double life. And again, by the way, admonishing the sinner has to be done with gentleness. That's church teaching about this. You don't just hammer them over the head with truth. Truth divorced from charity is not Christian. It's just a bludgeon. You're just a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal, as St. Paul says. That's not the way to correct somebody. But you can say, well, we're not talking about someone telling tall tales. What about the very serious corruptions that exist? Okay, well, let's use another analogy and let's amplify the stakes here a little bit. Let's say you were at somebody's house and you said, hey, can I borrow your computer just for a second? I need to check my email. And you get on there and you see some suspicious files. And so you open them up and it's something like child pornography or something like that. Wow, like that's criminal. That is extremely serious. Okay, so what do you do in a scenario like that? Do you jump on Facebook and say, guess what I found on so-and-so's computer, everybody? I hope you would say no, that's not the thing to do in that situation. Again, it's extremely immature, and it's very revealing of what your motives are in this situation. That's not going to solve anything or fix anything. What you should do is probably go to the police. And if it's not something that's criminal, if it's something like lies and deceits that we want to trap and expose, well, then again, we're back to that first scenario in which the mature thing is to go and correct them gently. And if they won't listen to you, bring back a witness. And if they still won't listen to you, okay, then maybe it's time to, maybe at that point, you're justified in bringing it to the attention of the church, either authorities or the faithful. Now you might be thinking, well, okay, so what about you, Brian? What makes you so self-righteous? Well, first of all, what I'm doing right now in talking about this isn't detraction, because this is publicly known. Detraction is when you take something that isn't known and you expose it to the world, to the detriment and to the injury of that person's reputation. Right now, we're talking about something that has since been revealed. And it's worth pointing out that why has it been revealed? How do we know about this? It's because other people at Church Militant are now all doing the same thing they've always done, but now to each other. The snake is eating its own tail. And that's my concern at this point. This is why I want to talk about it at this point. If there's a vortex vacuum at this point, don't go searching for some replacement version of this. Don't go feed and reward some other organization. And Church Militant isn't the only organization that has been doing this kind of thing. And don't give a pass to the other people who have been involved in this organization, who have collaborated with it. The other people who have worked there, who are now trying to distance themselves. It's like, okay, fine. Even if they didn't know about this secret sin, they did know and participate in this very public sin of detraction. And what I desperately want us all to learn from this scenario, from these scandals of disgrace, is to stop rewarding that kind of content on the internet. And the algorithms of these social media empires, these tech companies, which do us no favor for those of us that are trying to live according to Christ's teachings, they reward scandal, they reward denunciation. So if somebody is out there in the habit of just always denouncing other people, as opposed to affirming things that are good and true, I would strongly recommend that you distance yourself from that kind of content. Don't make the same mistake again. Don't find yourself a year or two down the road saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe that they were living this double life the whole time, when the entire time they were in the habit of doing something that was a very public sin that we should have all noticed all the while, which is the reason it shouldn't be a surprise for us when some hidden sin comes to the surface. If they were in the habit of doing a very public sin day in and day out, sin is corrosive and it will lead to more and other kinds of grave sins. So it shouldn't be a surprise to us when scandal erupts from organizations like this. It's embarrassing for those of us who are faithful Catholics to have to now be associated with this. It's a weapon that the enemies of the church can now use against us Catholics to say, oh yeah, you're probably just like that Michael Voris guy. Like, how many faithful Catholics are having to suffer from the clergy abuse scandals, where, you know, if you get out there and you try to evangelize and you try to promote the gospel, and people will say, oh, you're just promoting child molesters. It's like, yeah, okay, great. Now I have to weed through all of this nonsense before I can actually get to the thing that is really important here, which is proclaiming the kingdom. That's what I want to be doing with my channel. But we've been so distracted as a community and as a church by this kind of nonsense that we have to do all of this navel gazing and adjusting our own behavior before we can get back to the mission that we should all be preoccupied with. So my hope in addressing this, yet again, another scandal, is to say, let's not make the same mistake again. Don't fascinate yourself with people who are publicly denouncing other people all the time. Don't participate in that. Don't feed it. Feed yourself with those things that are edifying, and those personalities who are not in the habit of doing that. And that's why I say, correct me if I find myself in a pattern of doing that, because I'm not impeccable by any stretch. I can't go pointing out the logs in other people's eyes because my eyes are full of specks. I can't go casting the first stone because I'm not without sin. That's why I'm going to devote myself, I hope, and again, correct me and keep me accountable to this, to my own contrition, to privately confessing my sins and to working on the things that I need to work on, and as much as possible, allowing myself to be used in the proclamation of the gospel. So I hope we can devote ourselves to those things and reprioritize ourselves and adjust ourselves and calibrate ourselves to those good things. I pray for the people who have been involved in these organizations that they can correct at this point, but please don't go and find some sort of replacement now that there's a vortex vacuum out there. If you're a Catholic who is a leader in your profession and you're like me, you probably had some desire for more opportunities to network with other Catholic professional leaders in order to help each other grow professionally, spiritually, and economically. Because this is exactly what we're doing with Fisher's Network. We're mobilizing Catholic professionals and economic leaders into local crews so that they can better support one another in the hopes of building up something like a local Catholic economy. As they do so, they can better support their parish in a variety of ways. Imagine as a parish having a group of experts you can turn to for advice and support on business decisions that have to be made. This is why pastors participate in our crews as well. They get business mentorship while having the opportunity to build up leaders in their community. So if this sounds like a way to strengthen your local Catholic community,